Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please have a seat, and once you're settled in, I'll move that microphone close to your mouth, and tell us your full name and spell the last, please.
Stephen Willison, W-I-L-L-I-S-O-N.
Thank you. Ms. Ivey.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Willison, what was your occupation in, actually, let me just start there. What is your current occupation?
I am an attorney.
And how long have you been an attorney?
Since 1990.
And in 2007, were you working as an attorney?
I was.
And in what capacity?
I had my own law firm that did primarily work for insurance companies on property coverage matters.
And so when you say you did work for an insurance company, what was your primary role then with that company?
So we would help insurance companies determine their legal rights under the policy of insurance and determining whether or not a loss was covered typically, which most of my cases involved whether there was an intentional loss, which would not be covered by the policy of insurance, or if during the claims presentment process there was a material misrepresentation, which would also void the policy. So we would quarterback the investigation and the people, and then we would do what's called an examination under oath a lot of times, then we'd pass our recommendations on to the company, and then they would make their own decision on the claim.
Can you explain to the jury what an examination under oath is?
Sure, it's a lot like, you may have heard of depositions, but it's a lot like that, although the court rules don't apply. There's a provision in the policy of insurance, and every policy of insurance, that says that you have to participate in this process called examination under oath, where we get to ask you questions under oath with a court reporter present, and have you give us your side of the story, explain things that we need to know about. We get into some of the details of what was going on before, during, and after the loss. It's kind of their chance to present their side of the story to the insurance company, and it's our chance to find out some details that maybe we don't have yet in the investigation.
And are these examinations under oath, are they recorded?
They are. There's a court reporter present.
And then are they transcribed?
And they are transcribed.
And did you have an opportunity to interview Ms. Linda Stermer?
Yes, we did an examination under oath in 2 parts with her.
In 2 parts? And
yes.
Do you recall the dates of those?
I believe the first one was in February of 07. I believe it was January 7, 07 was the fire. I think February 07 we did the first one. I think the second one was October of 07.
And both of those were transcribed?
They were.
I'm going to show you what's been marked People's Proposed Exhibit 35 and 36. If you could just take a moment and look through those and see if you recognize those.
These appear to be the transcripts of those examinations under oath, although these particular copies seem to have some redactions, some things that were apparently agreed to be taken out of them.
And so other than the redactions, the transcripts then are, there haven't been altered or changed other than those redactions from your original transcripts?
It would not appear so, no.
And, Your Honor, at this time I would move to admit People's Exhibit number 35 and 36 into evidence.
No objections, Your Honor.
Thank you. And as part of your interviews in February and October, were you able to work with Ms. Stermer and draw out a map?
I believe particularly in the first one, we did ask, as she was describing where things were, both on the property and in the house, we had her draw out maps. I believe I had her sign them and made them exhibits to that examination.
So they're actually an exhibit then to those transcripts?
Correct.
And they're included in those transcripts?
Yes.
So I'm just going to show you a copy. And if you could just verify if that's been included in those transcripts and if that's a fair and accurate representation of what is in those transcripts.
Yes, I don't think I saw the exhibits in the binder, but yes, this was part of the transcript. This exhibit 4, and EUO exhibit 3. 3 was the one that we had her sign on the inside of the house, and EUO exhibit 4 was the one that we had her draw of the property, driveway, things like that.
Your Honor, just to be safe, I'm going to mark this then as People's Proposed Exhibit 37, just in case it's not included in those binders. And at this time, I would move then to admit the map that's included as part of the transcript, but we'll read it separately. And there are 2 pages.
Now,
No objection.
I do see that those are the last 2 pages of exhibit 36.
So, Your Honor, then I would withdraw the new number of 37. We'll go ahead and just not to confuse the record, we'll keep it as Exhibit 36. It's just 2 pages out of Exhibit 36. At this time, Your Honor, I'd ask for permission to publish the map to the jurors. And I do have, may the record reflect, I have 15 copies here, 1 for each juror as we're going through transcripts.
Okay.
And when you refer to an EUO, that's your examination under oath, is that correct?
Yes, EUO, examination under oath. So it's just a shorthand term of art in the industry.
And just to be clear, you had referred to this map then as an exhibit in your transcript, and then that is what that exhibit sticker is on that map.
Correct.
So not an exhibit sticker from today's hearing.
It is not, yeah, that is not a trial exhibit number. That was an EUO exhibit number. We had several documents that we collected during that process.
Thank you. So I'm going to have permission to publish then the transcripts, Your Honor.
You may.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and then put these up. We're going to start out with the February 27th of 2007 transcript.
Sure.
And we'll put that up on the screen. I'm going to start then, just have you verify the first page. You don't have to read the first page, but if you could just then verify the parties present and the date.
Sure. This occurred on February 27 of 2007. I was there. Mr. Jeff Getting was there, who was Linda Stermer's attorney. Rodney Thuma was a representative of the insurance company, was there, and the court reporter was Rebecca Kerr from Network Reporting.
I'm going to have you go to page 3, and I'm going to have you start about a quarter of the way down where it says Mr. Willison. And if you could just read to the jury from that statement down.
Line 10?
Yes, line 10 down.
My name is Stephen Willison, and I am the attorney for Farm Bureau Insurance. We're here today to take your examination under oath. That is a process by which you participate in the company's investigation of your claim and the events surrounding this loss. This is probably going to be part 1 because it's far too early to have any discussions about the details of your claim, but we did want to get together relatively quickly and talk about the details of the fire. Everything you say is being recorded and eventually will be turned into a typewritten transcript. So it's very important that all of your answers are with words. If you nod your head like you have done recently, or you say, uh-huh, or you point to something in a photograph, I may understand what you're saying, but there's no good way to type that. So from time to time, I may ask you to clarify.
I'll have you continue then through line 14 on the next page, which would be page 4.
Okay, whether you meant yes or no, or to describe what's very obviously what you're pointing at, so that we have a clean record. Okay, and then she responded, I understand. And then I went on. It's also important you understand that you're under oath today. So just like if we were in a courtroom, all the penalties of perjury apply. But maybe more relevant to your insurance claim, you need to understand that the policy of insurance says that if you were to even try to mislead the insurance company, that can be a reason to deny your claim and void your policy. Even if you were the world's worst liar and no one believed you for a second, just the fact that you tried is a reason to deny it. Okay? And she said yes.
And you said that in one of those statements that you thought it was far too early. Can you describe to the jury why you felt it was too early and why you were conducting it then in February and then again in October?
Sure. Obviously, we knew that this claim involved the loss of life and was a total loss fire and was probably going to be big and complicated. And so putting together a claim on a total loss fire can take some time when you have to, if you think about every t-shirt that's in the attic and every little thing that's in your junk drawer, all has to be inventoried and valued and everything else, so that can take some time. But the facts of the fire, we wanted to get into early, and that's because we want to get to the root of it right away. If you are if in this process you're going to choose to be honest with us, then your memory will be freshest then. And if you're going to choose to be dishonest with us, then you will have the least amount of time to come up with a story. So we wanted to get the details of the loss, the fire first, and then we would come back later and talk about the claim.
And I'm going to have you go to page 9, line 11, and just have you read to the jury then 11 through 15.
I asked, now, the day of the fire, the day before the fire, who was living at your house? She responded, our 3 sons, myself, and Todd. I asked, what about Brittany? She said, no, she was living in Florida.
I'm going to have you then go to page 13, line 13 through 19.
Page 13, line 13, you said?
Line 13, page 13, line 13, read through line 19, please.
I asked, how long were you and Todd married? She said, we were married in 1993. I asked, how long had you been in a relationship prior to that? She said, well, I don't recall exactly how long we were in a relationship before that. We met in 1989. I asked, how did you meet? And she said, my work.
I'm going to have you flip to page 14, and if you could read the entire page, please.
Oh, sure. My question was, since you were married in 1993, have there been any periods of separation? She said, no. Had either of you ever filed for divorce? She said, no. Had either of you ever discussed divorce? She said, yes. When did discussions of divorce start? She said, I don't know exactly. I know that. And then I interjected a month, a year, 10 years. She said, we had talked about it a few times over the last couple of years. My question was, whose idea was it? She said, I think Todd brought it up first. I asked, and then I just need to get a little bit of the flavor of the dynamics of the relationship between the two of you. Todd wanted a divorce and you wanted to stay together, or was it the other way around? I mean, what was going on when you were discussing it but not doing it? She said, I don't know that he was serious when he first brought it up. I think it was just kind of, I don't know, maybe we should get a divorce. I asked, when he first brought it up, what was your reaction? Did you agree or disagree? She said, I did not want a divorce.
And I will have you continue to page 15, if you could read that page for me as well.
At any point in time, did you decide you wanted a divorce? And she said, yes. I said, when did that start? And she said, maybe in the past year or so, and then we would talk about things and everything would be all right. And I asked, I know relationships are complicated, but was there any particular thing that was driving a wedge between the two of you? Any particular topic that was frequently discussed? She said, finances. I said, what about the finances? She said, we always seem to just not have enough money. I felt that Todd wasn't running his business as well as he could have been, and I felt he should work more. Am I doing this whole page?
Yes, please.
Okay. So then I asked, as in he wasn't doing it smart or he wasn't doing it often enough? And she said, well, I think that kind of goes hand in hand. I think if you're not doing it often enough, I don't think that's very smart. I said, that's true, but sometimes people work all day, all night, but they end up spending more than they make, and so it's not worthwhile. Other people are not working, and that's why it's, and she interjected, I just don't think he was putting enough effort. I said, okay, had there been any discussion of cutting back on any lifestyle or expenses, or selling the house and getting a smaller place, or selling off part of the property?
And I'll have you read down to line 7.
And she responded, we had sold part of our property. I don't recall exactly what year. I think it may have been 2002 or 2003. So I asked, when you bought it, how much property did you own? She said close to 120 acres. And I asked, and how much did you sell in 2002 or 2003? She said around 90 acres.
I'm going to have you slip down then to line 18 and read just the bottom of the page.
I asked, why did you sell the 90 acres? She said, so that we could build and pay off things that we owed. How much did you sell it for? She responded, I don't recall. I believe it was around the figure 99,000 is in my head for some reason, but I'm not sure if that was the exact amount. It seems that that was about, and I said, so about $1,000 an acre, and she said, I believe so.
And I'm going to have you read the next page.
How much debt did you pay off with that? She said, I don't know. I asked, was it enough to pay off the debt and build the house? She said, no. I said, so what did you do for the rest? We borrowed. From whom? Bill Fleetwood was her answer. I asked, who's Bill Fleetwood? She said, he's a gentleman here in Lawrence that Todd has done business with quite a bit over the years. And how much did you borrow from Bill? I'm not positive. I know it went in stages. I'm thinking that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 100,000, but it was in stages as we needed different things. Do you still owe Bill today? She said, no. When did you pay off Bill? When we got our first mortgage on the property. I asked, when was that? She said, I believe that was in December 2003. I asked, how much was that mortgage? She said, $200,000. Keep going?
Please.
So then I asked, so you sold property and got roughly $100,000. You borrowed another 100, and then you borrowed 200. So your cost of construction was $300,000. She said, no. How much was the cost of construction? I asked. She said, I don't know. I asked, do you have an estimate? And she said, I don't.
I'm going to have you continue reading to the bottom.
You seem pretty confident it wasn't 3, and she said, right. I said, so what was it? She answered, I really don't know. I know that we paid off a lot of debt with it. I know that Todd made some business investments with some of it as well. I asked, well, what is your best understanding of how much each of those categories was? She answered, I really couldn't give you a good guess. I said, okay, do you think you had $100,000 of debt? She said, no, I don't believe we had. 50,000? She said, maybe. Then I asked, what kind of business investments are we talking about? And she said, Todd would buy military surplus, gloves, clothing, and then resell them to stores. Boots, like Mickey Mouse boots, that kind of thing. Mop suits, carbon suits, and that kind of stuff in large quantities.
And I'll have you stop there. And if you could go to the next page at the bottom on line 24, just read those last 2 lines in the next page.
I asked if they got a building permit to build the house, and she said yes.
And I'll have you read page 20.
Did you get it inspected? And she said yes. And I asked, what do you have in front of you? And she said, I went to Associated Governmental Services and got these copies of I think they're everything that Todd turned in order to begin construction of our home. I asked, to begin construction? She said, I guess you have to file permits and drawings and diagrams before you can receive a permit to even begin. It gives a layout, but there were significant changes made to it that are not reflected in those drawings. I noticed after I picked it up yesterday. Who did these drawings, do you know? And she said, Todd. I believe that Mr. Fleetwood helped him. And so then we marked that as Exhibit 1 to the examination under oath. I said, we've marked those documents that you gave us as Exhibit 1, right? She said, yes. We'll be back to your floor plan in just a minute. That tells us that you filed these in 1998, right? She said, yes. That wasn't the impression I got of how long you were building it. So what was the delay between 98 filing and beginning to build? She said, Todd had a knee surgery And so he had to stop working on it completely. And so it sat for a few years.
I'm going to have you continue.
I asked, what did you do in 1998 to finance the beginning of construction? She said, well, the original plan was just to build it as we could afford to build it. And so we had a basement done, and we paid cash for that. Where did you have that cash? She said, what do you mean where? I said, how did you have that lump sum? I mean, she said, Todd, through working, just saved that amount and paid for it. So a rich uncle didn't die, you didn't get an insurance policy claim or something like that. She said, no. Then I asked, so how far had the house gotten before he had knee surgery? She said the basement was completely concrete, what was to be concrete, and then he had the trusses, I believe they're across the basement. The thing that was going to hold up the first floor? She said yes, and that was it. And then when did you restart? Answer, I believe that was in 2002. So it sat for 4 years. She said probably 3 or 4 years.
And I'm going to have you go to page 22 and continue reading that page, please.
And why 3 or 4 years? She said, because Todd's knee surgery, he was unable to work, and we got into substantial debt at the time. So then I asked, that kind of brings us back to you were in debt, you sold some property, you borrowed the mortgage. It sounds like you were back in debt again at the time of the fire when all this stress was going on in your marriage. Or was it just a matter that you were heading back toward that again? Her answer was, I don't think we've ever been out of debt. We'd have some paid down, but I think we were just in debt continuously. I asked, was there ever a discussion of bankruptcy? She said, no. I said, why not? She answered, because we just felt people that filed for bankruptcy are ignoring their debts, and it hurts you more in the long run if you don't continue to try and pay off your debts. I said, so at the time of the fire, what would you estimate your debt was? She answered, I don't know. Maybe, I'm not really sure. Do you want the mortgage included in that? And I said, let's set the mortgage out for now. She said, okay, maybe $100,000 or so.
And I'm going to have you then go to page 23 and then start at line 8 and then just read down.
I asked her where the $100,000 was owed to, and she said Todd had received loans from family members. I asked which family members. She said his mother. I asked Sandra. She said yes. I believe that was about $30,000. His sister Kathy was the most recent, $25,000. His brother Brad, $7,000. What was Kathy's last name? Martone, Stermer. When you said Stermer, you saw that I was right by Brad, right? I'm sorry, Brad Stermer, correct. Medical, she said medical bills. I asked, how much do you figure that was? She said, I don't know, maybe $10,000. A truck around $14,000 or $15,000. Mechanic who has the truck, $3,500.
And I'll have you stop there and just go to page 24. And if you could start on that page, please.
I asked how long he had the truck. She said 7 months. I asked if there was anything else. She said, I'm sure there is. I just can't think of what it is right at this minute. The truck, who's that with? She said, do you mean who it's financed through? First Community Federal Credit Union, I believe. FC, First Community, I believe. Or no, First Federal Credit Union, sorry. So I asked, what are your payments on that? She said, close to $500 a month. I asked, are you making monthly payments to mom, sister, brother? She said, no. I asked, do you owe any of your friends or family money? Meaning her instead of Todd. She said, I borrowed $1,000 from my grandmother. I asked, what's her name? She told me Frances Pierce. I asked if there was anyone else, and she said no.
And then I'm going to have you jump down to line 23, and that page, read that to the bottom of the page and continue into the next.
Were there any other wedge issues in your marriage besides finances? And she said, the horses that I had. I said, okay, what was an issue about the horses? She answered, I just know that he would get frustrated sometimes at the number of horses I had and the work that was involved in taking care of them. He just got tired of that. What about the expenses? She said, no, he never complained too much about that. I asked, how many horses do you own or did you own at the time of the fire? And she said the number of horses that were at the property at the time of the fire was 12.
And I'll have you stop there, and then if you want to go ahead and switch now to page 33, on line 21, if you'll just read the bottom 5 lines of that and continue on to the next page on 34.
I asked her, what was the most you had been at in your marriage? She said 49. I said 49 horses? And she said yes. I asked, do you have the facilities for 49 horses? And she said, I leased land for them. And when was the last time you had 49 horses? She said, I believe it was in 2002.
And I'm going to stop you there. If you can switch to page 45 for me, please, on line 12. If you could start there and read to the bottom of the page.
I said, now we talked about issues in your marriage, we talked about finances, we talked about horses. Anything else? She said, pretty much no. I guess that pretty much sums it up. So then I asked, let me go through some other categories. Did either of you have any problems with drugs or alcohol? She said, Todd has had some addictions over the years. I said, like what? She said, to Vicodin. And when was he addicted to Vicodin? She said, about the time that he had his knee surgery, back when that permit was first gotten, when he blew his knee out. And how did he get past that? She said, I talked to his doctor and had the doctor change our prescriptions. Because I had shoulder surgery right before Todd had his knee surgery, and so the doctor prescribed both of us Vicodin. Keep going.
I'm going to have you skip down then to line 11 and read to the bottom of the page.
What other addictions has he had? She said he has smoked marijuana before and sleeping pills. I asked he used or been addicted to. She said the sleeping pills I believe he was addicted to. The marijuana, I kind of think he was addicted to that for a very long time, but then he was able to quit smoking it for a long time. He smoked it since then, but not on a daily or regular basis. I asked sleeping pills. She said yes. I said, what was he using, or when was he using those? And she said the few weeks before the fire. And do you think he was addicted to those? And she said yes. And before then, also, he had been addicted to them. It's been a couple years.
I'm going to have you go on to page 47 and continue on.
When was the last time that you saw him take a sleeping pill? She said the weekend of the fire. The day of the fire? She said, I think it was the night before, the day before. I asked her when. She said, when I got home that night, he took that and then his medicine for his ear infection that he had. I said, what kind of sleeping pill did he take? And she said, Ambien CR. I asked if that is over the counter. She said, no, it's a prescription. I asked, did he take any that morning? She said, I don't know. Did you see him take any medications that morning? She said, I seen him take his cough syrup, and I know he took some pills, but I don't know which pills he took. I asked several pills. She said, I don't know. I said, you said some pills. I'm just trying to get an idea of what you saw. She answered, I just saw that he had his bottles next to him, and he opened them and took his medicine. I don't know. What bottles were there? What was in the bottles? She said, I don't know what the drugs were. There were some that were prescribed by the doctor for his ear, and, I don't know.
And go ahead and continue then until the bottom of the page, please.
All right. So then I keep going. I asked, like painkillers or like antibiotics? And she said, I think they might have been antibiotics or antihistamines. I'm not sure exactly which. Which else was there? She said, that's all I can recall sitting right there. Any sleeping pills there? She said, I don't think they weren't there. They were in the bathroom. I don't know if he took any of them. Did he act like he was under the influence of any drugs at any point the day of the fire? She said he was loopy, but he had been. He had been that way for the last for the last couple of weeks, he had, displayed where he was just kind of doped up, kind of. I don't know how else to describe it, just loopy, and like he'd be talking and then he would just stop in the middle of a sentence and then come back to it minutes later or something, as if there was no pause. Just kind of weird. My son described him one day as being stoned. I asked, did you ever confront him about it? Did you ever ask him what he was using? She said, yeah. He said, what did he say? She said, not to worry about it. It wasn't any of my business.
I'm going to have you go to page 49 and continue on that page.
I asked, are there any other addictions? She said, not that I'm aware of. I asked, did Todd ever have an affair? She said, not that I'm aware of. Did you ever have an affair? She said, no. I said, did either of you ever accuse the other one of having an affair? She said, yes. When and who? I asked. She said, well, Todd has female friends, I have male friends, and we'd get angry, I guess, sometimes and just accuse the other person or ask the other person, but never, I don't think, ever seriously. I guess just kind of, so I asked, had either of you made that accusation within 6 months of the fire? She said, yeah, Todd had. I asked, who did he accuse you of having an affair with? And she said, well, it was actually kind of funny because he came down to where I worked to surprise me one night to meet me for break, and I just so happened to have fallen at work and wasn't there at work. I was at the hospital. And when he called me on my cell phone, I answered it, and he says, are you at work? I said, no. And right then he says, who the hell are you with? And I told him my boss had to take me to the hospital. So then Todd came to the hospital and, everything was fine. But it was just kind of weird that he decides to show up and surprise me on the day that I end up twisting my ankle and going to the hospital. So
But I'll just have you read the next two lines, 6 and 7.
Where were you working at the time? She said, Chemlink.
And I'll have you drop down to line 18 on page 50, and if you could read to the bottom of the page.
Any other accusations? She said he would just sometimes yell something like that, like, are you seeing somebody else? Because, we had talked about divorce, but you never had? And she said, no. Did he ever accuse you of being in a relationship with a woman? And he asked me if I was.
And I'll have you read on page 51 down to line 16, please.
With who? She said, my friend Kate Fox. I said, had you and she ever had a relationship like that? And she said, no. So I asked, and what was his basis of that accusation? Did he tell you? And she said, yeah, because Kate had attempted suicide and was in the hospital, and I was really distraught over it. We were really close, and we worked together, and I was just really worried about her. And he asked if we were lovers. Was that a serious question, or was he just telling you to stop worrying about her? She said, I think he was getting sick of me worrying about her so much, and it was, just his way of, putting things.
I'll have you read then 15 and 16 and stop on that page.
I said, okay, you worked with Kate Fox at Chemlink, and she said yes.
And then I'm going to have you go to page 52, and if you could read this page for me, please.
I asked if there were any other recent accusations of affairs. She said no. And then I asked her, you haven't accused him in the last 6 months? And she said no. I asked, what about abuse? Any abuse in the relationship? And she said yes. I said, what kind, when? And she said, different times through the years, just different things. I asked, let's just talk about that in the last year. She answered, the most recent was around Thanksgiving time. He had shoved me across the room, had thrown my cell phone at me, and he pushed me into the wall. I asked her, what was that fight about? And she said, part of it was me making a pineapple upside down cake to work for a potluck and not having made one for home. But I had all the ingredients to make two. I just hadn't made the one for home yet. I was going to make it on the weekend. And then that was about the time that he said, you're treating your coworkers better than your family. And then that night before the fire, he wanted to make love and I didn't. And he came into the bedroom and tried to pry my legs apart and take my pants off, but I didn't let him.
And I'm going to have you continue on that on page 53, please, that page.
I said, so was there any sexual intercourse that night or not? And she said no. And I said, how did you stop him? And she said, I told him it wasn't going to make anything better and that I didn't want to. And if he made me, I would tell the police. I had never said anything like that to him before, so at least he knew I was serious. I asked, have you ever hit him or thrown anything at him? And she said, no. I said, has he ever accused you of it? And she asked, of hitting him? Yes. And I said, but it wasn't true? And she said, right. Did you ever call the police? Did he ever call the police on you? She said, no. I said, did you ever call the police on him? And she said, yes. Before we ever moved to Lawrence, sometime prior to 1996. I couldn't give you the date. I didn't actually call the police on him. The girl was staying at our house, called the police, but I had talked with them. And at that time, he had hit me and pushed me quite a bit, and I had some marks on me, and 2 police officers came, a male and a female. And when he came out, the female officer was with me, and I was about ready to file a report. And he came out and said, are you sure you want to do this? Because you'll go to jail too. And I asked what he meant. And he said, well, if you accuse me of hitting you, then I'll accuse you of hitting me, and we'll both go to jail. All the grandparents were out of town at the time, and the police officer said that was true, and that if we didn't have someplace for the kids to go, that they'd have to have, I don't remember who they said, but it came down to like protective services would have to come and get the kids. And Todd says, are you sure you want to do this? And I talked to the police officer, and she said, well, yeah, it's his word against your word, and if you both say that you both got hit, then we have to take both of you in and let the judge decide. So I didn't pursue it any further, and they left, and we spent the night there in the house, and he apologized to me.
I'll have you continue.
So that was the only time that you called the police on him. And she said, well, like I said, I didn't call the police were called. But as far as abuse between he and I believe those 2 incidents were around Thanksgiving time and that time.
So I'm going to stop you right there. So in the duration of the marriage, she's saying that she's had 2 incidents, one prior to 1996 and then one at Thanksgiving time.
And the one the night before the fire.
And the one the night before the fire. Thank you very much.
That's what she wanted me to believe, yes.
And then I'm going to then have you start at line 24 on page 54, if you could continue on there.
I said, thank you very much. Who called the police around Thanksgiving? And she said, Kate Fox. I asked, what? And she said, Kate Fox. I said, what was Kate Fox doing there? And she answered, she wasn't there. She had called me on the phone to come and pick me up for work because we rode together and most every day. And I was crying and hysterical and upset, and I told her I couldn't talk to her, and so she called the police.
And I'm going to have you jump down to line 21 and read the bottom of that page, please.
I asked, this incident the night before the fire where he tried to force himself on you, what kind of situation did that create between the 2 of you? She answered, he wasn't happy. I said, how are you? And she said, well, I actually felt relieved that he stopped. I mean, he kept yelling at me about it and different things, but not too bad. And he told me that if I would just make love with him, that everything could be just fine.
I'll have you continue.
I said, did you at any time from that moment on? She clarified, make love with him. I said, yes. And she said, no. I asked any sort of sexual contact at all the day of the fire, and she said, no. Any more instances like that where he was trying to force it? And she said, no. I asked, did you tell anybody about this incident before the fire? And she said, no. I said, have you told anyone about this since the fire? She said, yes. I asked, who? She said, I told my mother, I told Mr. Getting, I told my counselor.
Now I'll have you stop there, and if you can go to page 57, start halfway through line 23.
But up until Kate Fox and I began working together, that was the most I had ever hung out with another female, and that was mainly because we worked together and we carpooled every single day.
And I'm going to have you stop there, and if you can go to page 62, please, on line 21.
I was asking about medications, and she said she was taking Lexapro since November of 06, and I was given the prescription for Ambien CR. That was my prescription, but I wasn't taking it.
And I'm going to have you then stop and go to page 63. and go to the 4th line down and just read lines 4 and the portion of 5.
This was her response. She said, the Ambien, I took it a couple of times, but it made me feel too groggy and too sluggish.
So you can stop there.
Okay.
And then I'm going to have you go to page 64, line 16. If you could just read 4 lines for me.
You described him in the morning of the fire having a tray of pill bottles by him. I meant what? And she said, no, I just said a couple of pill bottles, and I think that they were just what was prescribed for his ear.
And I'm going to have you go to page 66, line 10, and if you could read that from 10 to the bottom of the page.
66, line 10. We're in the middle of an answer. She says, I was thinking about some things, and I had spoken with an attorney that we know who had handled some of Corey's custody and stuff, and asked him that if Todd ever did decide he wanted a divorce, if he would represent me. I asked, who is that? She said, Mr. Jeff Gaggie, Gagie, G-A-G-I-E. But I don't know if you would need that, because you said within the last couple of years, and that was back in maybe 2002 or so, so it was a few more years than I was thinking. I asked, you contacted Mr. Gaggie? She said, well, actually, I was using Mr. Is it Gaggie or Gage? Do you know?
Gaggie.
Gaggie, okay. Well, I actually was using Mr. Gaggie for the rescue case of the 23 horses, and I asked, you needed an attorney to rescue horses? And she said, yeah, sometimes you do. I asked, I mean, I'm not opposed to using attorneys, and she said, sometimes you do. And, you know, Todd had got frustrated and upset about so many horses coming in all at once, and the fact that the previous owner of them had changed her mind about turning them over and that. So Mr. Gaggie was representing me on that, and I told him that Todd was really upset and frustrated, and he had spewed off about getting a divorce.
I'll have you stop there.
Sure.
And then I'll just have you skip down to line 14.
When did you have that conversation with Mr. Gaggie? She said, I don't know, probably sometime around 2002, then again in November of 06.
And I'll have you just jump down to line 19 and continue there.
This is her answer. In November, I went to Mr. Gaggie and asked him if he would do a divorce for me because I just decided that I just couldn't keep living this way. I had told Todd after that it was just too much, and he gave me some paperwork at that time. I didn't file, I didn't pay him or anything, but he gave me the paperwork that would be necessary to file. So when you ask me if I filed, no, I had never filed. But yes, I did talk to him pretty extensively about it, and I had told him about some different incidences that happened and that made me feel really uncomfortable.
I'll have you continue.
I asked her, like, what? And she said, well, Todd had been out hunting one morning, and I was sitting in the dining room at the computer before we moved it into the other room. And he came up the stairs. He was holding his gun and cleaning it. And he was holding his gun and a cleaning kit. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see that the gun was open. It was like a shotgun or a rifle. And he was carrying a cleaning kit. And he came over and he set the cleaning kit on the dining room table behind me and just held up the gun. Well, I could see the reflection in the computer screen that the gun was not pointed directly at my head, but I never turned around and faced him or anything at that point and didn't act like I seen him exactly what he was doing. And he held it there and he said, I'm really sorry I have to do this. And I turned around and just looked at him and I said, you're a jerk. And he said, why? And I said, why would you joke around like that? And he says, you were so scared. And he just started laughing at me. And he had told me Todd had been really studying the Bible a lot Todd had been really studying the Bible a lot this past year, 2006. I asked, he told me? And she said, pardon me? And I said, did you say someone told you Todd was studying the Bible? And she said, no. I said Todd had been studying the Bible pretty heavily over the past year, a lot more than he ever had before, and, well, just a lot. And he told me that in the Bible it says that a man who gets a divorce from a woman, if she should remarry after that divorce, then it's still considered, in the Bible, it's considered adultery. So that man who divorces that woman is considered just as much of a sinner because he caused that sin. And he says, so I can't divorce you, but you can divorce me. So I told Mr. Gaggy that. Keep going?
Nope, I'm gonna have you stop there. I'll have you read on line 19 down.
I asked, so any more episodes like that in between November and when the fire occurred? And she said, just a lot of little things. Like he would talk about divorce, he would talk about death, he would talk about suicide, he would talk about insurance, he would talk about moving to Canada. Just a lot of just different things.
And I'll have you read that on page 70.
When would he talk about suicide? She asked, what do you mean when? Just different times? Like he'd say, I'd be better off dead, I'm so sick of this. I asked what was going on when he'd say, I'm so sick of this. She said, being in debt all the time, not having energy to work on the house. You know, our house wasn't complete, and he would stay home, not go to work, not work on the house, not do anything. He didn't, this last year, I mean, he was an avid hunter before, and we always had a lot of meat, deer meat and that. And this last year, he hardly ever went hunting. He got 2 deers, and I think that's the least he got in many years. The boys wouldn't go hunting with him this year. I asked why. She said, just too busy with other things. And that frustrated Todd. And he would say things like, the boys don't even enjoy hunting anymore, and I don't enjoy hunting anymore. He didn't play church basketball this year, and just a lot of different things. He just didn't. I asked, did you guys attend church regularly? She said, no.
And I'll have you stop there.
All right.
And then if you could go to page 75, at the bottom of the page, on line 24.
I asked, what time did you wake up the morning of the fire? She said, probably around 7 o'clock.
And I'll have you continue that on page 76.
Did you have an alarm set? She said, no. I asked, were all 3 sons and Todd home when you woke up? She said, yes. Who all was awake when you woke up? She said, no one. I asked, what did you do? And just to clarify, this is the part of the examination where I go through moment by moment on the day of the fire. I want to know everything that happened so that we have a very clear timeline and we can start to verify the story. So I asked her, what did you do? She said, just puttered around about the house. I asked, I really need to know all the puttering. She said, I'm sorry. I'm trying to think what I did first thing. I always get up and brush my teeth right away. I got dressed. At some point that morning, I remember straightening my bathroom. Did you do any cooking? Did you do any laundry? She said, not right away that day, no. I asked, are you a coffee gal? She said, no. Well, I went down to the convenience store and got some eggs, and I believe it seems like it was Smoky Links, maybe some milk. I said, okay, wait, when you left to go to the convenience store, was anyone else awake? She said, no. I asked, do you know what time that was? She said, I know it was before 10 o'clock. I asked, you went to what store? She said, the Village Marathon. I asked in Lawrence. She said, uh-huh.
I mean, stop, just jump down to line number 9.
What all did you buy there? She said, I bought some eggs, some, I believe it was Smoky Links. I think I got some milk, and I filled up my blazer. I asked, so you did buy gas for the blazer? And she said, yes. I asked, how much gas? Do you remember? She said, I don't remember. I think the total bill for everything combined all came to, I believe, around $20. I asked, anything else? She said, no. I asked, did you have any gas? Did you put any gas in a gas can that day? She said, no. I said, are you sure? She said, I know I didn't. And I asked, you know you did not? And she said, right.
I'll have you continue on page 78.
How long were you there? She said, not very long, just long enough to do that, just to purchase those things. I asked, what time did you get back home? She said, within minutes. We only lived 5 minutes away at the most. I asked, so you were home in 15 minutes? She said, maybe 15, 20 minutes I was gone a total of. I asked, now what? She said, I began cooking. I asked, is there anybody awake? She said, I can't remember if Todd was awake yet or not. I know that while I was cooking, he was up, but I can't remember if he was up before then or not. I asked, did you start cooking right away? She said, as soon as I got back, yes. I asked the eggs and sausage. She said, yes. And then I put coffee on for Todd because he is a coffee drinker. Okay. And at some point he was awake, and she said, yes. I asked, while you were cooking? She said, yes. What else happened? I told him when he came out into the kitchen, I told him I had gone down and gotten those things and told him that I used the debit card. The debit card for what bank? I asked. She said, his debit card from his business account. I asked, why did you use the debit card from his business account? She said, because I knew there was money in there. I asked, where does he have his business account? She said, it's now LaSalle Bank in Paw Paw. I asked, do you have any records of that account with you today? She said, I don't. I'm sorry. I said, can you get those for me? She said, I can try. I don't know if the bank will let me have them because my name was not on the account. Keep going?
Yes, please.
So I asked, how did you get his debit card? She said, I took it out of his wallet. I asked, was that common for you? She said, yes. And then I continued my question, or was that unusual? She said, no, it was common for me. I asked, was it common to use the business account to buy groceries? She said, yes. He would write me a check from there for different things. I would either deposit it into the joint account or cash it and use it for whatever we were supposed to use it for. I told him about other purchases I made with it over the course of the weekend, and he got pretty upset because I hadn't written them into the register yet, and the fact that I had used it a few times. So I asked, so what did you buy over the weekend with it? She said, I bought a disposable camera. I asked why. She said, my grandmother had her 90th birthday party on Saturday, and I walked off and forgot to take my digital camera. And so I grabbed a disposable so I could get some pictures of family, and I filled prescriptions at Walgreens and at Walmart on Saturday.
And I'm going to have you stop there, and I'm going to have you go to page 81. Yes.
About 5 minutes or
Oh,
so.
that's fine.
Unless you're getting near the end, but I don't think you
No,
are.
so I mean, we can end at any time, Your Honor.
Want to do it now?
That would be fine. We could do
Okay,
that if you
okay.
want, if the court would like to.
Okay. So, I don't think anyone's objecting, right? Okay.